My mum shouted, "Live or die, I don't care," after my accident, and no one in my family came. I'm Alison, 25, lying in a hospital bed with tubes everywhere. The car accident left me with multiple fractures and internal bleeding. When I called my mum from the ER, her words cut deeper than my injuries. "Live or die, I don't care." No family member visited me during those critical weeks. I was abandoned by blood, but what happened next changed everything. Before I continue my story, please let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how I turned devastating rejection into my greatest strength. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Philadelphia in a house that looked perfect from the outside. White picket fence, neatly trimmed lawn, and a family of 5 that appeared completely normal to everyone else. But appearances can be deceiving, especially when it comes to family dynamics. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my brothers Jordan and Kyle. Jordan, 3 years older, was the golden child who could do no wrong in my mother Margaret's eyes. He was athletic, popular, and seemed to effortlessly earn her approval. Kyle, 2 years younger, was the baby of the family, coddled and protected from any criticism or responsibility. And then there was me. From my earliest memories, I felt like an outsider in my own home. My mother Margaret was controlling and emotionally distant, especially toward me. She scrutinized everything I did, from my grades to the way I dressed. Nothing ever seemed good enough. "Alison, why can't you be more like your brother?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. My father Thomas wasn't cruel like my mother, but his passivity was its own form of neglect. Whenever tensions rose or my mother's treatment became particularly harsh, he would retreat to his garage workshop or busy himself with yard work. "That's just how your mother is," he would say with a shrug when I sought his protection. "Try not to take it personally." But when you're a child, how can you not take rejection from your own parents personally? Family events were particularly painful showcases of my outsider status. At my 10th birthday party, my mother spent most of the time bragging to neighbors about Jordan's baseball trophies. When I received academic honors in high school, my achievements were brushed aside with comments like, "Well, school comes easier for girls anyway." Meanwhile, Kyle's average report card earned a celebration dinner. I still remember the sting of being left out of family photos during vacation. "Alison, you take the picture," my mother would instruct, effectively erasing me from family memories. At holiday gatherings, relatives would comment on how much my brothers resembled my parents, while I was told I must take after some distant relative. Despite this treatment, or perhaps because of it, I threw myself into academics and extracurricular activities. I joined the debate team, volunteered at the local hospital, and maintained straight A's. Part of me still desperately hoped to earn their approval, to hear my mother say she was proud of me just once. But that moment never came. When I was 16, my grandfather suffered a stroke. During his rehabilitation, I watched in awe as his physical therapist helped him regain mobility and independence. The therapist's compassion and skill left a profound impression on me. That's when I found my calling. I wanted to help people heal, to be the support for others that I never had myself. My announcement that I wanted to become a physical therapist was met with my mother's typical dismissal. "You don't have the discipline for medical school," she said. "Besides, we always thought Jordan would be the doctor in the family." And the day I received my acceptance letter to a physical therapy program in Chicago was the day I decided to break free. At 18, I packed everything I owned into my used car and moved 400 miles away despite my family's disapproval. My father's parting words were, "Your mother thinks you're making a mistake," not even claiming his own opinion. By 25, I had built a life in Chicago that I was proud of. I worked at a well-respected rehabilitation center, had my own apartment, and had cultivated friendships that gave me the emotional support I never received from my family. I called home for holidays and birthdays, still hoping for some shift in our relationship, but the conversations remained stilted and brief. My accomplishments were acknowledged with tepid interest at best, while updates about my brothers consumed most of the discussion. I had learned to live with the ache of familial rejection. I convinced myself that the distance was a blessing, that I was better off focusing on my career and the connections I had made in my new home. But deep down, a part of me still yearned for the unconditional love that everyone deserves from their family. I just never imagined how completely that last thread of hope would be severed. The accident happened on a Friday night in January. Chicago winters are notoriously brutal, but that particular evening, the city was being pummeled by one of the worst snowstorms in decades. The hospital administration had sent out emails suggesting staff leave early if possible, but I had stayed late to work with a patient who had just undergone knee replacement surgery and was struggling with pain management. "You should head home before the roads get worse," Dr. Mendez, the supervising physician, advised as he passed my treatment room around 7. "Just finishing up with Mr. Rodriguez," I replied. "I'll leave in 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes changed the trajectory of my life. By the time I left the rehabilitation center, the snow was falling so thickly I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The roads were slick with black ice beneath the fresh powder. I drove cautiously, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, leaning forward as if that would somehow improve my visibility through the relentless white curtain. I was only 3 miles from my apartment when it happened. I approached an intersection just as the light turned green. I proceeded forward, unaware that an oncoming pickup truck was sliding uncontrollably on the ice. The driver later told police he had tried to stop, but the brakes locked up, sending him skidding directly into my driver's side door. The impact was deafening, metal crushing against metal glass, shattering the horrifying sensation of my small sedan being pushed sideways across the intersection. Time slowed in that strange way it does during traumatic events. I remember thinking with strange clarity, "This is how I die," before my head slammed against the window and everything went black. I woke up disoriented in the emergency room, the harsh fluorescent lights burning my eyes. The pain hit immediately afterward, a symphony of agony from what seemed like every part of my body. A doctor was leaning over me, her face serious but kind. "Allison, can you hear me? I'm Dr. Patel. You've been in a car accident." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the breathing tube they had just removed. I managed to croak out, "How bad?" Dr. Patel didn't sugarcoat it. "You have multiple fractures in both legs, 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a concussion. We're taking you to surgery soon to repair some internal bleeding. But you're stable, and with time and proper care, you should recover." The next few hours were a blur of scans, tests, and preparations for surgery. A nurse named Jessica stayed by my side, her gentle efficiency a comfort in the chaos. "Is there someone we should call for you?" she asked as they prepared to wheel me to the operating room. "Family. In crisis, it's who most people turn to first. Despite everything, despite years of emotional neglect and distance, my mother was the first person I thought to call." Jessica held the phone to my ear as it rang. "Margaret speaking." My mother answered, her voice crisp and formal as always. "Mum," I managed to say, my voice weak. "I've been in an accident. I'm at Chicago Memorial Hospital. It's pretty bad." There was a pause then. "Well, what do you want me to do about it? Live or die? I don't care." The words hit me like a physical blow. Jessica's eyes widened in shock as she surely heard my mother's response through the phone. "I just thought you should know," I whispered. "You made your choice when you moved away." My mother continued, her voice cold. "You can't expect us to drop everything because you got yourself into trouble." The call ended, and with it, the last thread of hope I had been clinging to about my family. As they wheeled me towards surgery, tears rolled down my temples and into my hair. Jessica squeezed my hand but said nothing. What could anyone say in the following days as I drifted in and out of consciousness after surgery? I made attempts to reach my father and brothers. Each call yielded similar results. My father claimed he couldn't get away from work though he was retired. Jordan was in the middle of an important project. Kyle said simply, "Mom thinks it's not a good idea to visit right now." My friend Tanya, who I had met at a yoga class 2 years earlier, was the first person to visit me. She burst into my hospital room the day after surgery, her eyes red from crying, carrying an armful of magazines, toiletries, and my favorite snacks for when I would eventually be allowed to eat again. "Your neighbor called me from your emergency contact list," she explained, taking my hand carefully to avoid disturbing the IV. "Allison, I'm so sorry this happened, but I'm here now and we'll get through this together." As I looked at her determined, caring face, I realized that sometimes the family you choose is more real than the one you're born into. I just didn't yet understand how profoundly that truth would shape my recovery and the rest of my life. The following days in the hospital were a study in contrasts, the physical pain of my broken body gradually subsiding thanks to medical intervention, while the emotional wound of my family's abandonment festered and deepened. My room became a stark visual reminder of my isolation. While other patients' rooms overflowed with flowers, balloons, and a rotating cast of concerned relatives, mine remained Spartanly institutional. The only personal touches were a small potted plant from Tanya and a card signed by my colleagues. The medical staff noticed. I caught their whispered conversations and pitying glances when they thought I wasn't paying attention. "No family again today," one nurse would ask another during shift changes. "That poor girl. came the inevitable response. I tried to rationalize my family's absence to the concerned social worker who stopped by daily. Chicago is pretty far from Philadelphia, I explained, and the weather's been terrible, plus everyone has work commitments. Ms. Garcia, the social worker, nodded sympathetically, but didn't seem convinced. Distance can be challenging, she agreed diplomatically, but in times of crisis, people usually find a way to be there for those they love. Her words stung because they stripped away my comforting illusions. I knew the truth: 400 miles wasn't an insurmountable obstacle. A plane ticket wasn't an unreasonable expense for a family emergency. My parents had the resources. What they lacked was the desire. The final blow came 1 week into my hospital stay. Unable to sleep due to pain, I was scrolling through social media on the phone Tanya had brought from my apartment. That's when I saw it. A photo posted by my brother Kyle. It showed my entire family smiles wide at Jordan's community basketball game. The caption read, "Family supporting family, # proud brother." The timestamp was from that afternoon, just hours after my father had told me on a brief call that everyone is too busy this weekend to make the trip to Chicago. I stared at their smiling faces until my vision blurred with tears, then threw my phone across the room, instantly regretting it when pain shot through my ribs with the sudden movement. A night nurse named Raj rushed in, alarmed by the noise. "Everything okay, Allison?" I couldn't answer through my sobs. He retrieved my phone now with a cracked screen and sat quietly beside my bed. He didn't ask questions, just offered silent companionship until my crying subsided. "My family," I finally managed to say, gesturing weakly at the phone. "They said they couldn't come because they were busy, but they're at a basketball game." Raj looked at the photo, then back at me. His expression contained no pity, only a quiet understanding that somehow made it easier to bear. "Sometimes the people who should love us the most are the least capable of showing it," he said. "That's their failing, not yours." That moment marked a turning point. I stopped making excuses for my family's absence. I stopped hoping each day would bring news of their impending visit. I accepted the reality in my time of greatest need, when I was physically broken and at my most vulnerable, they had chosen to abandon me. The hospital social worker, Ms. Garcia, became an unexpected ally. Once I acknowledged the truth about my situation, she connected me with resources for patients without family support. She arranged for a home health aide to assist me after discharge and found a temporary wheelchair ramp program for my apartment building. Meanwhile, my co-workers organised a rotation schedule to visit me. Each day, a different colleague would stop by, bringing small comforts and keeping me connected to the outside world. Diane, my supervisor, came most frequently, often on her lunch break, rushing in with updates from work that I knew were designed to make me feel valued and missed. My neighbour, Mr. Wilson, and retired postal worker who lived across the hall, called to let me know he was collecting my mail and keeping an eye on my apartment. "I've watered your plants too," he assured me. "That little fern in your kitchen window was looking a bit peaky, but it's perking up now." Perhaps most surprisingly, I formed a friendship with my hospital roommate Eleanor, an elderly woman recovering from hip replacement surgery. Initially, we had little in common beyond our shared space, but as days passed, we began to exchange stories. Her sharp wit and resilience in the face of her own family complications resonated with me. "My daughter hasn't visited either," she confided one night. "We had a falling out years ago over her choice of husband. Stubborn old fool that I am, I let pride keep me from reconciling. Now I'm paying the price." She reached across the gap between our beds, her hand wrinkled but strong. "Don't be like me, dear. Don't let bitterness take root." But on my darkest night in the hospital, when pain medication wasn't touching the physical agony, and my emotional wounds felt just as raw as my surgical ones, bitterness seemed like the only rational response. I lay awake watching shadows move across the ceiling, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. Eleanor had been discharged that morning. The room felt cavernous without her presence. The night staff were busy with a new trauma admission. For hours I existed in a bubble of isolation and pain so complete that I wondered if this was what my mother had wanted when she said she didn't care whether I lived or died. By morning, though, something had shifted inside me. I couldn't control my family's choices or actions. I couldn't make them love me the way I deserved to be loved, but I could control how I responded to their rejection. I could choose what this experience would mean for me. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, I made a decision: this would not break me. Somehow, I would find a way to transform this pain into something meaningful. 2 weeks after the accident, Dr. Patel signed my discharge papers. Physically, you're stable enough to continue recovery at home, she explained. But recovery is a marathon, not a sprint. You're looking at several months of healing and rehabilitation. I nodded, trying to appear more confident than I felt about the challenges ahead. My legs were still in casts, meaning I would be wheelchair-bound for at least 6 more weeks. My ribs were healing, but made every movement a lesson in pain management, and I was returning to a third-floor apartment in a building with no elevator. Tanya drove me home from the hospital, her compact car stuffed with my belongings, medical equipment, and the various supplies we'd need for my care. "I've been staying at your place," she admitted as we approached my neighborhood. "Hope that's okay. I wanted to get everything ready for you." When we reached my apartment building, the first surprise awaited me. A group of my colleagues stood at the entrance beside a temporary ramp that had been installed over the front steps. Marcus, a fellow physical therapist, stepped forward with a wheelchair. "Welcome home, committee," he said. Committee, he said with a warm smile. The second surprise came when we reached my floor. Somehow my co-workers had coordinated with the building management to temporarily convert the storage room at the end of the hall into a bedroom for me, complete with a hospital bed on loan from the rehabilitation centre where I worked. "We figured stairs and a third-floor apartment weren't going to work right now," explained Diane, my supervisor. "This is just until you're mobile enough for your regular place." I was overwhelmed by their thoughtfulness. These people, who had no obligation to me beyond professional courtesy, had reorganized their schedules, donated time and resources, and problem-solved challenges I hadn't even had the energy to consider yet. As days turned into weeks, this support system proved invaluable. My colleagues created a care calendar, ensuring someone checked on me daily. Some brought meals, others helped with laundry or transportation to medical appointments. A few even took turns staying overnight during those first crucial weeks when I couldn't manage basic self-care alone. What touched me most deeply, though, was how some of my former patients began to appear at my door. Mr. Abernathy, an elderly man I'd helped after his stroke, arrived with homemade soup. "You got me walking again," he said simply. "Now it's my turn to help you." The teenager I'd worked with after her sports injury came with her mother, bringing freshly baked cookies and offering to run errands. "You made me feel normal when nothing in my life felt normal," she told me. "I want to do the same for you." These moments illuminated something I'd never fully appreciated: the ripple effect of kindness. Every person who showed up for me during my recovery was in some way returning care I had extended to others, often without realizing the impact of my own actions. My first physical therapy session as a patient rather than a provider was humbling. Marcus, who had volunteered to be my therapist, was professional but gentle as he guided me through the initial assessment. "This is weird," I admitted, lying on the treatment table I usually stood beside, being on this side of therapy. "Think of it as field research," Marcus suggested with a smile. "You'll be an even better therapist after experiencing it yourself." The road to physical recovery was grueling. Progress came in frustratingly small increments. The day I first stood on my healing legs supported by parallel bars. The pain was so intense, I immediately burst into tears. "I can't do this," I sobbed as Marcus stood patiently beside me. "It hurts too much." "You can," he countered firmly. "And you will. Because you're stronger than you know, Alison. I've watched you push other people through pain. Now it's your turn." His faith in me became a lifeline on days when my own resolve faltered. And there were many such days when the physical pain combined with emotional exhaustion made even getting out of bed seem impossible. Days when I checked my phone still harboring a tiny hope that someone from my family would call to check on my progress. They never did, not once. Eleanor, my former hospital roommate, kept her promise to stay in touch. She called weekly, her gravelly voice relating neighborhood gossip and updates on her own recovery. "I'm using a cane now," she announced proudly during one call. "The physical therapist says I'm ahead of schedule." I told him I have a reputation to maintain with my young friend. Through these connections, I slowly began to redefine my understanding of support and care. Family, I was learning, wasn't necessarily determined by blood relation. It could be built through choice, cultivated through mutual respect and genuine concern for another's well-being. One evening, about a month into my recovery, I found myself staring at my phone thumb, hovering over my mother's contact information. Part of me still yearned for her acknowledgement, her concern, any indication that I mattered to her. But as I sat there, surrounded by evidence of how many people had stepped up to care for me in her absence, I set the phone down without making the call. I was done waiting for approval and love, from people who had demonstrated repeatedly that they were unwilling or unable to provide it. Instead, I would focus my limited energy on nurturing connections with those who had proven their loyalty and compassion when I needed it most. This shift in perspective didn't erase the hurt of familial rejection. That pain remained a dull ache beneath all other emotions. But it did free me to invest more fully in relationships that were reciprocal and affirming. And in doing so, I began to discover strengths within myself I hadn't known existed. 3 months into my recovery, during a particularly frustrating physical therapy session, where I was struggling with a new walking exercise, Marcus made a suggestion that would change everything. "You should document your recovery journey," he said casually, supporting my weight as I wobbled between parallel bars. "You have a unique perspective as both a PT and a patient. People would find that valuable." I laughed it off initially. Who would want to follow my painfully slow progress? "More people than you think," he insisted. "Recovery is universal. Everyone faces setbacks. And you're good at explaining the process in accessible terms."
Aiko saint.
That night, unable to sleep due to discomfort, I created a simple social media account titled Healing Steps and posted a photo of my legs still in partial braces alongside a brief explanation of my accident and professional background. "Day 87 post-accident," I wrote. "Today I took 10 steps unassisted." As a physical therapist becoming a patient, I'm experiencing firsthand how recovery isn't linear. Some days feel like breakthroughs, others like setbacks. I'll be sharing this journey, both physical and emotional, for anyone who might be going through something similar. I expected perhaps a handful of sympathetic friends to follow the account. Instead, within days, hundreds of people had found and engaged with my post. Comments poured in from others navigating their own recovery journeys, caregivers seeking insight into their loved ones' experiences, and medical professionals interested in the patient perspective. Each day I shared honest updates about my progress. I didn't sugarcoat the difficult moments, the pain that sometimes left me in tears, or the frustration of regaining independence in tiny, incremental steps. I also applied my professional knowledge, explaining the science behind rehabilitation in accessible language and demonstrating modified exercises for different mobility levels. Unexpectedly, it was when I first mentioned my family situation that my following truly exploded. I had been hesitant to share this aspect of my recovery, concerned it would seem like I was seeking pity or airing private grievances. But after receiving a particularly thoughtful care package from my co-workers, I wrote a post about chosen family. "Today marks 4 months since my accident," I wrote. "Also 4 months since my blood relatives told me they didn't care if I lived or died and chose not to visit during my hospitalization. But look at this beautiful evidence of how many people do care." I included a photo of the gift basket and cards. Family isn't just DNA, it's who shows up when you're at your lowest. It's who celebrates your victories, no matter how small. Today I walked 50 steps. My chosen family cheered for every single one. That post went viral overnight. Thousands of comments appeared from people sharing their own experiences with family estrangement, abandonment, and the healing power of chosen connections. Many expressed how my words had given them permission to acknowledge painful family dynamics they had been taught to hide or excuse. As my physical strength gradually returned, so did a new sense of purpose. A local support group for accident survivors invited me to speak about the psychological aspects of physical recovery. Standing before the group, leaning on a cane but standing independently, I shared my story without shame or self-pity. Recovery isn't just about healing bones and tissue, I told the room of attentive faces. It's about rebuilding your sense of self when trauma has shattered your previous identity. It's about discovering who remains constant in your life when everything else has changed. Sometimes the family you were born into isn't equipped to provide what you need. That doesn't mean you have to heal alone. The response was overwhelming. People lined up afterward to share their stories, many with tears in their eyes, expressing how isolated they had felt in similar circumstances. One elderly woman hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for saying what I've needed to hear for 60 years. That evening, lying in bed reflecting on the impact of the meeting, an idea began to form. What if I could create a formal support network for accident and trauma survivors who lacked family support? A way to connect people who understood this specific type of compound loss. The physical trauma compounded by abandonment during vulnerability, I reached out to Diane, my supervisor, who had been so supportive throughout my recovery. I want to start a non-profit. I explained, outlining my vision for Bridge the Gap, an organization that would provide both practical assistance and emotional support to those recovering from physical trauma without family resources. Diane didn't hesitate. "Use the rehabilitation center's community room for your first meeting," she offered. "I'll help you spread the word." Our initial fundraising was modest, a simple online campaign shared through my now substantial social media following. The goal was $5,000 to cover basic materials, refreshments for meetings, and transportation assistance for those who needed help getting to support groups. We raised $15,000 in the first week. Local businesses began reaching out, offering services and sponsorships. A legal aid office provided pro bono assistance with incorporating as a non-profit. A print shop donated brochures and informational materials. A neighbouring physical therapy practice offered free complimentary services like massage and acupuncture to our members. 6 months after my accident, a local news station contacted me for an interview about Bridge the Gap. The reporter, a compassionate woman named Anita, asked thoughtful questions about the organisation's mission and my personal journey. "Your story began with a profound rejection from your family," she noted during our conversation. "Yet you've transformed that experience into something that's helping countless others. Do you credit your family situation with making you the person you are today?" I considered my answer carefully, aware that this would be broadcast in my hometown as well as Chicago. "I think we all have defining moments that shape us," I replied finally. My family's response to my accident was certainly one of those moments for me. It forced me to recognize that love isn't guaranteed from the people who are supposed to provide it unconditionally, but it also opened my eyes to how many others were willing to step forward and offer support I never expected. I paused, making sure my next words reflected my genuine feelings rather than bitterness. I wouldn't wish that experience of abandonment on anyone, but I'm grateful for the clarity it gave me about what truly matters in relationships. And if sharing my story helps even one person feel less alone in a similar situation, then something valuable has come from that pain. The interview aired the following week. I watched it with friends gathered in my apartment, now navigable with just a walking cane. They cheered and celebrated how articulate and passionate I appeared, how the piece beautifully captured the mission of Bridge the Gap. What I hadn't anticipated was the response from Philadelphia. The first call came from my brother Jordan, his voice tight with anger. "What the hell, Allison? You've embarrassed the entire family on television. Mom is furious." I didn't mention any names, I pointed out calmly. I simply told the truth about my experience. "Your truth makes us look terrible," he snapped. "You could have kept that private." Like how Mom kept it private when she told me she didn't care if I lived or died, or how all of you privately decided not to visit me in the hospital, that kind of private. He hung up without responding. Kyle texted next, his message more measured but equally defensive. "You don't know what was happening here when you had your accident. Dad was having health issues. Mum was stressed. You're making it sound like we abandoned you for no reason." I didn't dignify this with a response. Any health issues serious enough to prevent a visit would have been mentioned during our brief phone conversations. This was revisionist history designed to alleviate guilt. My father called last, his voice weary. "Your mother is very upset about this interview," he began without preamble. "I'm sure she is," I replied. "The truth is often upsetting when it contradicts the story we tell ourselves." "Allison," he sighed heavily, "can't you just let this go for the sake of family peace?" The irony of his appeal to family peace, when none of them had bothered to check if I was at peace while fighting for my life, was not lost on me. But rather than point this out, I simply asked, "Dad, did you watch the actual interview?" "Well, no, but your mother told me about it." "Maybe you should watch it before we have this conversation," I suggested. "I think you might find it's less inflammatory than you've been led to believe." The calls and texts continued sporadically over the following days, each family member attempting to control the narrative in their own way. But something had fundamentally changed in me. Their disapproval no longer held the power it once had. I had built a life filled with genuine connection and purpose. I had discovered my own worth independent of their validation. For the first time, I recognized that their reactions said far more about them than about me. And with that realization came an unexpected gift, the freedom to respond from a place of strength rather than desperation for approval. The unexpected visit came on a Saturday morning in early August, 6 months after my accident. I had progressed to using just a cane, and my apartment had returned to its normal configuration now that I could manage the stairs to my 3rd floor. I was sorting through emails related to Bridge the Gap when a sharp knock interrupted my concentration. Opening the door revealed the last people I expected to see, my parents standing stiffly in the hallway, their expressions a mixture of discomfort and indignation. "Mom, Dad," I stumbled over the words, genuinely shocked. "What are you doing here? Can we come in?" My father asked, his voice revealing how unusual he found this situation. I stepped back, gesturing them inside with my cane. They entered cautiously, as if entering foreign territory. In many ways they were. This was my space, built without their input or support, filled with photographs of friends they didn't know and mementos from a life they hadn't bothered to inquire about. My mother's gaze swept critically around the apartment before settling on me. "You're walking," she observed, as if surprised. "Yes," I confirmed. "With a cane, and not for long distances yet, but I'm making progress." An awkward silence descended as we moved to the living room. My parents perched uncomfortably on the edge of my sofa while I took the armchair opposite them. I waited, sensing they hadn't travelled 400 miles for pleasant conversation. "This has to stop, Allison," my mother finally said, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone she had used throughout my childhood. "These public accusations about your family are inappropriate and hurtful." I blinked, genuinely confused. "What accusations?" "This charity of yours," she continued, pronouncing charity as if it were distasteful. "The interviews, the social media posts, you're painting us as monsters because we couldn't drop everything to rush to Chicago during a crisis." I took a deep breath, determined to remain calm. Bridge the Gap is a non-profit organization that supports people recovering from trauma who lack family support. It's not about you, it's about helping vulnerable people during difficult times. "Don't be naive," my mother scoffed. "Everyone in our community knows it's about us. The Hendersons asked your father if we really abandoned you in the hospital. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" My father nodded solemnly. "We've been members of that community for 30 years, Allison. Our reputation matters." Something inside me shifted as I realized they had traveled all this way, not out of concern for my well-being, but because my truth had made them uncomfortable in their social circles. They weren't denying what had happened. They were angry that others knew about it. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You're upset because people know you didn't visit your critically injured daughter in the hospital, not because you didn't visit your critically injured daughter in the hospital." My mother's face hardened. "You're twisting things as usual. We had perfectly valid reasons for not coming." "Which were?" I prompted. "Your father was having blood pressure issues," she said dismissively. "The doctor advised against travel." I turned to my father, who suddenly found the pattern of my area rug fascinating. "Is that true? Dad, did your doctor specifically tell you not to visit me?" His silence was answer enough. "And what about the day you told me everyone was too busy to visit, but then Kyle posted photos of the family at Jordan's basketball game? Was that doctor's orders too?" My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "We are not going to sit here and be interrogated by our own daughter." The word interrogated struck me as particularly revealing. Asking for basic accountability was in her mind an attack. This dynamic was so familiar, a replay of countless childhood moments when my reasonable questions were treated as insubordination. "I haven't mentioned any of your names publicly," I pointed out. "I've simply shared my experience of recovering from a life-threatening accident without family support. If people are connecting those dots, perhaps you should ask yourselves why the story rings true to those who know you." My father cleared his throat. "Allison, we understand you were hurt, but dwelling on the past like this isn't healthy. Families have disagreements, but at the end of the day, blood is thicker than water." The irony of him quoting that particular saying was not lost on me. "That's not actually the full quote," I said quietly. "The original is the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb." It means the opposite of how people use it today. It means that the bonds we choose are stronger than those we're born into. My mother stood abruptly. "I can see this was a waste of time. You've clearly made up your mind to hold this grudge indefinitely." "It's not a grudge, Mom. It's a boundary. There's a difference." "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded. "It means I'm no longer willing to pretend our family is something it isn't. It means I accept the reality of our relationship instead of continually hoping for something you're not capable of giving." My father rose to stand beside my mother, his expression troubled but resigned. "What do you want from us, Allison?" The question caught me off guard. What did I want from them? A year ago, I would have had a ready answer: love, approval, basic care during a crisis. But now, "I want you to acknowledge what happened," I said finally, "not to the world, but to me. I want you to understand that your choices caused real harm and that my healing process isn't about punishing you, it's about rebuilding my life. My mother's laugh was short and bitter. So we're supposed to grovel and beg forgiveness because we couldn't manage one hospital visit. This is exactly the kind of overreaction you've always been prone to. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity that no explanation would ever be sufficient. No amount of evidence would convince her that her actions had been truly hurtful. In her reality, my pain was always an overreaction, my needs always excessive. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Gladly, my mother snapped, already moving toward the door. But I want you to know that this behavior has consequences, Alison. Your brothers are furious about how you've portrayed the family. Jordan's considering a job in corporate law, and this kind of publicity could damage his prospects. Even now, in this moment of confrontation, my siblings' concerns took precedence over my near-death experience. The realization was both painful and liberating. Nothing had changed, and nothing would change. After they left, I sat motionless in my living room, processing the encounter. My phone buzzed repeatedly with text messages from my brothers, each expressing their displeasure in ways that echoed my mother's sentiments. Jordan threatened to cut ties completely if I didn't issue some kind of public retraction. Kyle suggested I needed therapy to work through my obvious issues with exaggeration. I responded to neither. Instead, I called Tanya, who arrived 30 minutes later with ice cream and a sympathetic ear. As I recounted the confrontation, her expression shifted from concern to indignation on my behalf. They really showed up to complain about their reputation without a single question about how you're doing, she marveled. That's actually impressive in its self-absorption. Her perspective helped me see the dark humor in the situation, and by evening, the knot of tension in my chest had loosened slightly. The following day, I received an unexpected email from my father's sister, Aunt Susan, who had always been a peripheral figure in family gatherings. I saw your interview, she wrote. What you described brought back so many memories of how Margaret treated me when Thomas and I lost our mother. She refused to attend the funeral because of some perceived slight years earlier. Thomas made excuses for her, then just as I imagine he's making excuses now. Please know that not everyone in the family shares their perspective. Some of us are very proud of the work you're doing with Bridge the Gap. If you're open to it, I'd love to reconnect. This unexpected show of support from an estranged relative was the first hint that the family narrative I had accepted as absolute truth might have cracks visible to others. Over the following weeks, Aunt Susan and I established a tentative relationship through emails and occasional phone calls. She shared stories about my father's family that helped me understand the generational patterns at play. Your grandmother was exactly like your mother, she explained during one conversation. Cold, critical, impossible to please. Your father learned early that the path of least resistance was to enable rather than confront. It's not an excuse for how they've treated you, but it might help explain the dynamic. These insights didn't erase the hurt, but they helped me contextualize it. My parents' behavior wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was the product of their own unhealed wounds and limited emotional capacity. Understanding this didn't obligate me to accept their treatment, but it did help me release some of the lingering questions about what I could have done differently to earn their love. The truth was both simple and profound: nothing. There was nothing I could have done differently. Their limitations weren't my responsibility to fix, just as their approval was no longer my metric for success. 1 year after the accident that nearly claimed my life and definitively changed its course, I stood before a small audience at Chicago Memorial Hospital's Community Education Center. My cane, now rarely needed except on particularly tiring days, leaned against the podium more as a symbol than a necessity. A year ago, I was wheeled through the emergency room doors of this hospital, broken in ways both visible and invisible. I began. Today I stand before you, not just physically healed, but transformed in ways I could never have anticipated. The audience included medical professionals, current and former patients, supporters of Bridge the Gap, and members of the media covering our organization's 1-year milestone. In 12 short months, we had expanded from a single support group to a network spanning 3 states, offering practical assistance, emotional support, and advocacy for those recovering from trauma without traditional family systems. My physical recovery had progressed beyond what even my most optimistic colleagues had initially predicted. I had returned to work part-time 6 months after the accident, gradually increasing my hours until I was back to a full schedule. My experiences as a patient had indeed made me a more effective therapist, providing insights into the emotional aspects of physical recovery that textbooks couldn't convey. There's a special kind of empathy that comes from having been on both sides of the treatment table. I often told new patients who were struggling with the frustrations of rehabilitation, I understand that recovery isn't just about the body, it's about rebuilding your entire sense of self. This perspective had earned me a reputation among colleagues and referral sources. Increasingly, I was assigned patients dealing with complex trauma or those without strong support systems. I embraced this specialization, finding profound fulfillment in connecting with those who, like me, were navigating the complicated terrain of healing in isolation. My social media following had grown exponentially, evolving from a personal recovery journal into a platform for education and advocacy. Publishers had begun reaching out with book proposals, interested in expanding my story and insights into a full-length memoir with practical advice for others in similar situations. "Your voice resonates because it's authentic," one editor wrote in her pitch. "You don't offer platitudes or toxic positivity. You acknowledge the genuine pain of abandonment while demonstrating that it doesn't have to define your future." I was considering these offers, carefully determined that any book would serve a purpose beyond simply telling my story. If I were to revisit the most painful chapter of my life in such detail, the result needed to offer genuine value to readers facing their own challenges. This principle guided all my decisions. Now, would this choice contribute something meaningful? Would it help others navigate their own difficult paths? Would it honor the journey I had undertaken? These questions were at the forefront of my mind when 8 months after their confrontational visit, I received a formal invitation to Jordan's wedding. The envelope, addressed in my mother's distinctive handwriting, contained not just the invitation, but a handwritten note from my brother. "Alison," it read, "I know things have been strange since your accident. Mom and Dad miss having you at family gatherings, and so do Kyle and I. It would mean a lot to have you at my wedding. Please consider coming, Jordan." The careful wording struck me as calculated, avoiding any acknowledgement of what had actually transpired, while implying that I had been the one to create distance. The suggestion that my parents missed me at family events they had never invited me to was particularly revealing. After careful reflection, I decided to attend, but on my own terms. I RSVP'd that I would be bringing a +1 Tanya, whose unwavering support had been instrumental in my recovery. I also booked a hotel room rather than staying at my parents' house, as would have been expected, creating necessary space and autonomy for what promised to be an emotionally complex weekend. The wedding was elegant, but impersonal, held at an exclusive country club with hundreds of guests, many of whom were my father's business associates rather than personal friends. When I entered the reception with Tanya, conversations briefly paused as people took in my presence. Clearly, my estrangement from the family had become common knowledge. My mother approached first, her social smile firmly in place. "Alison, I'm glad you could make it," she said, her voice pitched to carry to nearby guests. "You look well." "Thank you," I replied evenly. "Congratulations on Jordan's marriage. The ceremony was beautiful." She nodded, satisfied that appearances were being maintained. "Your father is over by the bar. You should say hello." Our interaction set the tone for the evening, polite, distant, focused on preserving the illusion of family harmony. Jordan seemed genuinely pleased that I had come, though our conversation remained superficial. Kyle was more reserved, watching me warily, as if expecting me to cause a scene. The most surprising moment came during the reception dinner when my father took the seat beside me while Tanya was visiting the restroom. "You've done well for yourself," he said quietly, nodding toward a group of guests who had just mentioned seeing me on a morning talk show discussing Bridge the Gap. "Your mother would never admit it, but she watches all your interviews." I wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected disclosure. "I'm not doing it for recognition," I said finally. "I know." He fidgeted with his napkin. "That charity of yours, it's helped people, hasn't it?" "Yes," I answered. "Many people." He nodded slowly. "I should have visited you in the hospital," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I knew it was wrong when we didn't go. I just couldn't." He trailed off, unable or unwilling to complete the thought. The admission, partial though it was, represented more accountability than I had ever expected from him. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. He looked as if he wanted to say more, but my mother appeared at that moment, summoning him for photographs with the bride's family. He rose obediently, casting one last uncertain glance at me before rejoining the celebrations. That brief exchange didn't erase the pain of the past year, nor did it resolve the decades of emotional neglect that preceded it. But it did suggest that beneath the rigid family narrative, there existed at least some capacity for reflection and regret. Not enough to prompt a meaningful apology or change in behavior, perhaps, but a hairline crack in the facade nonetheless. As I watched my family posing for pictures, their smiles practiced and camera ready, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. I no longer needed to be included in that carefully curated family image. I had built something more authentic, a life defined by genuine connection rather than obligation or appearances. The journey from that hospital bed to this moment had been arduous, filled with physical pain and emotional reckonings I wouldn't have chosen. But the person I had become through that process, the strength and clarity I had gained, the community I had helped create, all of these were precious to me now. Forgiveness, I had learned, didn't require reconciliation. I could release my anger toward my family without resuming destructive patterns of interaction. I could wish them well without needing their approval. I could acknowledge our shared history without being defined by it. As Tanya and I left the reception early to return to our hotel, I felt lighter than I had in years. "You okay?" she asked, squeezing my hand. "More than okay," I replied with a smile. "I'm free." The accident that had nearly ended my life had instead given me a new one, built on a foundation of self-worth that no one could shake. My family's rejection, painful as it was, had ultimately revealed to me the depth and breadth of human connection available beyond biological ties. In the end, what my mother hadn't realized when she uttered those cruel words, "Live or die, I don't care," was that she was granting me permission to live on my own terms, to build a life based on my values rather than her expectations. To discover that family is not just who you're born to, but who you choose to journey with through life's most challenging moments. And that realization was the most precious gift I could have received. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family members who didn't support you when you needed them most? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their journey. Thank you for being part of this healing community I've found. Remember, sometimes the family you choose is the one that truly helps you thrive.